It's so good to see all of you. So glad you're here. Hey, while we're waiting just a few moments for everyone to join today's interview, and today's interview, by the way, is on improving intake results, so I think you'll be interested. But in the meantime, I want to just quickly share 3 tips from past interviews that will help you generate some quick marketing wins. I know many of you are always looking for those quick marketing wins. So 1, track your lead and client sources. Most lawyers I speak with don't know which channels are generating what volumes of leads and clients, let alone the cost of each lead and client from each channel. Nor, frankly, do they know how many clients they sign up maybe this month, this quarter, this year, and how that volume compares to the same periods in the prior year. But closely monitoring lead and client sources so you can fine-tune your lead gen spending, it's really marketing 101. Call software like CallRail, you probably heard of CallRail, simplifies this task by letting you assign different phone numbers to different lead sources. That's simple, right? If you use dedicated landing pages, that's a way of doing it too. Landing pages, that's sort of a topic for another time, but you can use dedicated landing pages for tracking as well. Okay, second quick win marketing tip. Participate in community events happening in your town and in your area. These events deliver the highest return for several of my past guests. Actually, several guests have talked specifically about participating in community events. One of my past guests, if you remember, he brings balloons to attract kids and their parents to their booth or their table. Another lets his team pick the event of the month and has the staff man the event for pay, of course. He pays them. Clients come directly from these events, but referrals also pick up afterwards. And then number 3, real quick, update your referral sources regularly. Attorney referrals are the cheapest source of new business, and they bring the highest quality cases. You know that. To get more of them, keep your referral sources regularly updated on case status. If you don't frequently communicate status and progress, your sources will unfortunately think you aren't doing much work on those cases that they referred to you, right? You also need to communicate regularly with the clients who've been referred so they report positive feedback, positive experiences back to those referral sources. Paying special attention to both referred clients and the attorneys who referred them will bring you more and better cases than most any other marketing you can do, truly. Okay, turning to today's session, my interview is with father-son duo Michael Strauch and Richard James. After doubling a bankruptcy firm's sign-up rate, even though their fees were materially higher than their competition, Michael founded an intake service for lawyers that employs the same techniques he found effective at the bankruptcy firm. It has now been proven over 2 years across 10 specialties. And you probably already know Richard James, who for decades has been helping lawyers grow their firms while obtaining more independence, more free time, and increasing earnings. Okay, let's get to it. Let's get started. Let's get right to it like we always do. Welcome, Rich. Welcome, Michael. It's so great to see you both. Thank you so much for being here.
Hey, Cara, great to see you. Appreciate having us on.
Yeah, Cara, appreciate it. Looking forward to this.
Yeah, thank you both. Thank you both. So let's dive right in. What do you find most often impedes law firm growth? What are the primary hurdles that you see right off the bat?
Michael, you go for it.
Usually it falls into the sales realm, right? And we've used sales in 2 different ways. They're all part of the sales process, but you've got intake and you've got consultations or closing. And obviously, if we move to the front side, intake is the start of that, right? So making sure that when we get a new lead, we're able to take that lead and convert them into a set appointment and get that appointment to show up. Would you agree with that, Rich?
Yeah, I would +1 on what you said, and I completely agree. But the way that you have to think about this is you have to be on purpose about it. And what most law firms seem to miss is the purposeful part. And that means that we're going to track every single piece of information about every single lead every single time. So that's a internal discipline that we need law firms to adopt to be able to maximize the conversion of their qualified leads into either an appointment or a signed consultation. So that's step 1. Does that make sense, Cara?
Yeah, and I'm so glad you brought up intake because that's really what I wanted to dive into first. It's often overlooked. It's absolutely critical when we're talking about law firm growth, right? How can attorneys watching sort of maximize their conversion rate, right? Meaning turn more of those leads and calls that are already coming in into high quality appointments, high quality clients.
Rich, I think it'd be nice to start with maybe what not to do from an intake
Yeah, good point.
perspective.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, so let's talk about, so first, don't have Battle Axe Bertha answer the phone, right? She shouldn't sound like she just got off the smoking her third pack of Marlboros today and say, "La office," and click, right, when she doesn't like the other thing on the other side of the call. Like, we want the person to answer the phone to be warm and welcoming. That sounds obvious, but you'd be surprised in today's day and age how many times Battle Axe Bertha answers the telephone. And I mean no disrespect, but it just does happen. Michael, what else do you find that's challenging in the intake process?
So this is going to kind of branch into my next point of helping from the conversions perspective, but just the round robin ring across the office, right? So a phone call comes in and now it's ringing to everybody's phone, and whoever jumps to it first gets to it, and it's just a major distractor across the office. You don't have anyone dedicated to the role, and whoever's there picks it up. And so they're not necessarily a specialist in that role, which we're going to touch on in a second. And it just causes a major distraction and chaos. And now whoever that person is that answered the phone stopped what they were doing to fix and focus on that phone call. And so it like I said, it just kind of wreaks havoc across the office. Everybody's jumping all at once and no one knows who's going to pick it up. So it could really cause some complications in the intake process for optimization standards.
Yeah, to plus one on what Michael said, Cara, use a specialist, not a generalist, to do this. I mean, this really is the person who's going to be really, I mean, look, every firm is different. So some firms do free consultations. Some firms do paid consultations. Some firms do initial intakes, and they actually want their intake specialists to sign, get wet signatures on Social Security or contingent-based firms like PI or workers' comp. Sometimes they actually want to try to get them to close the deal on the very first call. I'm not suggesting there's a right or wrong answer, but in every one of these circumstances, using a specialist will maximize the results as opposed to using a generalist, like Michael suggested, where you never know who's going to grab the phone first. Does that make sense?
Sure. So first step, find the right person to answer the phone. A little bit of empathy goes a long way, I would imagine, right? Let's talk about specific scripts. How do we kind of stay on track, assuming there's maybe more than one person answering the phone, ideally not the attorney answering the phone every time? Let's talk about that.
Yeah, I guess we should have added that as a second or a third or a fourth. Don't ever have the lawyer answer the phone because they're obligated. They feel obligated to give advice, and I get why, and I know they want to be helpful, but they oftentimes screw it up more than they help. And I mean that lovingly. I've worked with, as you well know, attorneys for over 15 years now, and the number one thing that happens in a small law firm without any assistance, not even Battle Axe Bertha, when the attorney's answering the phone, is either they give advice or they don't get to the call, and it ends up going to their cell phone and their voicemail is full. But Michael, I know you have an opinion on the scripting. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, yes, we should have a script, but more importantly, we should have a set structure that we're using every single time. So that's the other thing we see from it. What not to do is just everything's dynamic and kind of flying by the seat of your pants. And you just kind of hope that you're following some sort of system each time and you're going to get them to set an appointment. The way we eliminate that from happening is we just have a structure that's followed every single time we're speaking to a new lead, and we're passing every new lead through that same structure. And by doing that, we're going to create consistency in the results, right? We're going to create consistency in the set rate. We're going to create consistency in the show rate. And we're just going to have a more consistent conversation across the board, which will help establish a sense of trust in us as a firm because we have a system in place.
Yeah, to again, plus one on what Michael said, as the gray hair, no hair, long tooth guy in the building here. I've been doing this since I'm 18 years old. I'm 35 plus years into this, owning small business, and I can tell you that my highest, most stressful moments came in the peaks and the valleys, right? I got excited in the peaks and I got really nervous in the valleys when it came to cash flow. And what I determined through the years was that what caused those peaks and valleys was an irregularity in my structures and my systems. And in this particular case, one of the most irregularities that'll happen in a law firm is their ability to be able to project and know exactly how many appointments they're going to schedule on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. That leads directly to number of clients retained, which leads directly to cash flow. So if you want to even out your cash flow, start using, like Michael said, he didn't call it this, but this is what we call it, a black box system, to make sure your intakes always pass through the same fundamental formula every single time. That'll avoid having the occasional like 30% set weeks and the occasional 90% set weeks, right? We'll always schedule, or whatever the outcome is, at the exact same percentage if we use the exact same system every single time. Does that make sense?
Consistency, absolutely. Can you tell us a little bit more about that structure, a little bit more about that formula? What are kind of the keys? Is there an intake form? What are we looking at when it comes to the details?
Yeah. So Michael, there's 11 steps we focus on when it's coming to set an appointment, right?
Yep.
And so let's we're not going to go, we don't have enough time to go through 11. I mean, that's an hour and a half presentation on its own, but let's focus on Michael, why don't you talk a little bit about the hell and the heaven and why that's so important?
Yeah, I mean, so generally speaking, look, whether it's in setting an appointment or closing the deal, prospects make emotional buying decisions, and then they justify those decisions with logic. And so we have to be able to get to the emotions of the prospect, both in an appointment setting regard and in a consultation regard. But from an appointment setting perspective, we've got to be able to build empathy, and we've got to be able to build trust with the prospect, which means we have to get to what we call their hell and their heaven, right? What is their hell right now? What is going on? What is their fear right now? And what does that look like for them on a daily basis? How's that affecting them? How's that affecting their family, right? We have to be able to probe that out of the prospect so they can talk about what's going on, and we can continue to build that relationship. The same thing applies to the heaven. This is more goal driven, right? Where are they looking to go? But they can't right now because of their current situation, because that hell that they're in. And so that relationship building step is so crucial, because like I said, it builds trust, but it also helps set us up for other benchmarks, right? It helps the prospect show up more prepared for the next step in the consultation, because now they've built that trust with us. Now they feel like they're ready to move forward. And it also helps with getting them to show up to their appointment, right? Because now we've created a relationship with them. Now they don't want to ghost us. Now they actually want to take the next step and show up. Rich, do you have anything to +1 on that?
Yeah, you nailed it, right? Because Car, the other day I was on a training call with our agents. I was on a training call with our agents, teaching them how to handle this hell and heaven structure. And it was just open office hours. And the question that came from 3 different agents was like, hey, I'm getting a lot of, I want to cancel or I want to reschedule when I call to do the priming calls or confirmation calls that we call them. And so without getting into detail what they are, just think about it as a reminder call, the same as your dentist would call you and remind you have an appointment. Similarly, but we do it a little differently. Right. Anyway, I'm teaching these agents for a law firm how to do this. And I said, well, what do you do? And they said, well, I called them to remind them. And they said, I'm really busy and I just think I'm going to have to reschedule. And I said, well, what did you do? And they said, well, I tried to find some more time in the day and I just really couldn't overcome it. I said, well, did you go back to their hell? And they said, no. And so we role played and I said, well, what was their problem? What was the practice area? What were they going through? And when we role played and we went back to their hell and we revealed what this person was deathly afraid of, and we had them state yet again what they wanted the outcome to be. All we had to do is go, don't you think you should show up today? I think it's important. Don't you agree? And they're like, yep, I'm coming. Like, because we reminded them what they went through before. And that's where the magic comes in, right? This isn't about a transaction. As Michael said it best, this is an emotional decision. And that's their job, to help them make that emotional decision. And believe it or not, you literally can script this. It's instruct and structure it. It's not that complicated. It's just getting them to commit to using this formula. So that's our big takeaway from inside of that 11 steps that we use.
That is super valuable. It's so smart. The heaven and hell, the lowest and the highest. How can we help you relieve this burden? Let's make it to this appointment. That's that first step. That's really smart. Often attorneys will tell me, There is no way that I can let anyone else handle my intake. I am the only one that can close these appointments. I have the knowledge and the internal, what do you say to those attorneys that unfortunately are becoming the bottleneck because they're either nervous or just not confident that they can really handle and hand this off, really?
My uncle used to tell me, he used to say, Richie, he called me Richie. He said, Richie, in business, you could be right or you could be dead right. He goes, which one do you want to be? And in this particular circumstance, attorneys believe that they're right, but they may very well be dead right because of their thought process, right? And so oftentimes it's hard because they have to trust, and in many ways they're not, they're they're honed to not be very trustful. But what we have to do is we have to get them to just give up a micro commitment and start to try. Like they getting on those calls is not the best use of their time. And somebody else actually can close a deal without giving legal advice, or can set an appointment without giving legal advice. Michael, you run into this all the time, don't you? Because they say there's no way a non-attorney can do this besides an attorney, and specifically the founder of the firm. But when you find out what their actual numbers are, they're a little disappointed. Am I right about that?
Yeah, I mean, exactly that, right? It's a little bit of a letdown to know for them where they're at compared to where they could and should be in many cases. And there's lots and lots of reasons for that, right? But I would tell you that to the attorneys listening to this, usually the biggest reason we feel that way is because many times we're not operating a structure currently. So everything is coming out of your mind. And so if you try to transfer your mind into somebody else, yeah, it's probably not going to work all that well. But if you have a system in place that you can just plug somebody into, that's a completely different situation, because now you've got a system where a non-attorney is never going to give legal advice because you built a system in a way that it doesn't ever have to happen. And now there's something to be followed every single time, whether that's intake or whether that's running a consultation. And now you could depend on the fact that they're going to follow that. Of course, you got to make sure and monitor that they follow through and hold them accountable to it. But you've got a system in place that somebody else can do that. And in many cases, as unfortunate as it is for many of you to hear, close at higher rates than you close.
Yeah.
We just had just as a quick, we had an attorney, family law attorney, start with us, I don't know, 2-3 about a month and a half ago or whatever.
Yep.
And he's been a family law attorney for 25 plus years, and has built a very big business, very big. It's been a reasonably sized law firm, 26 attorneys in a family law firm. That's a reasonably sized law firm for a small law firm. And so they're doing great, profitable, all the things they want to be doing, but their close rate was abysmal, right? Mm-hmm. And he said it to us in an interview. He goes, guys, you got to know, if you would have tried to convince me of this, I never would have believed you. It wasn't until I've seen it with my own eyes that non-attorneys could close better than attorneys that I now believe it to be true. I understand why it's so hard for attorneys to believe this, because they've been advised that either during the initial call or during the initial consultation, the number one job is to give advice. Right. And that isn't the number one job. Right. The number one job is to get them to say yes to moving to the next stage in the process so we can actually solve their problem for them, right? Right. That's the only job. But I understand why they are where they are. They just have to personally be willing to break free of that mantra, or they're going to forever be a slave to this. And it's the most demanding job in like time-wise and time vampire-wise. It's the most demanding job in the firm, which has the most opportunity to lose if somebody's not dedicated to it. So having the attorney do it all by themselves is a real challenge for a law firm to be able to grow past that stage.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a bit of a rewiring and a repositioning of how many of these firms have operated, possibly for decades, right? Mm-hmm. What about attorneys also will tell me, we sign 100% of the calls that we get. There's really no room for improvement. But guess what? They're not measuring it. They don't really know that to be true. So likely when something isn't measured, that's maybe not performing quite as well as we think it is, right? So how can we, really kind of approach this in a way where we're able to measure results and we're able to kind of track these efforts?
I'll say what I was always taught is what measured magnifies, right? What is measured gets magnified. And so, Michael, you have the actual data. What does it tell you?
Yeah. Well, first off, Car, if I had $1 for every single time an attorney came in and said they were closing 80% or above, we'd have a completely separate side business right now.
Yeah.
That would be booming. And so what I would tell you is that from a consultation and closing perspective, right? From that perspective, traditionally I hear that, and then the real data shows that on average, among firms that come into our program, at least the average starting close rate for them is 33.7%.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
so 33.7% across all practice areas across the board is on average what their starting close rate is. But many of them, to your point, never recognize that because it's not being tracked, right? And it's not being measured. And it's only when that begins that we really identify where we're truly at.
Yeah, which backs up the point to your question, Cara, which is, how do you do this? And the answer is, in our world, they're paying us for this, so we're telling them, look, we're forcing them to measure this, right? So it's they're paying for and now they have to do it. They're like, well, I'm paying for it, I guess I'll do it. Maybe that's what it takes. I don't know, but you have to be committed to start measuring this. Now, here's where I want to warn everybody, and this is where a lot of people get stuck. They immediately go into their case management, their CRM, their software package. Like, what are they going to have to do to measure this? And don't get me wrong, I love software and I love all the things that software can do. But in the very beginning, if all you use is a piece of paper and a pencil, and that's what you use to measure it, or if you want to get a step advanced, use a Google Sheet to measure it, that's fine. And I tell everybody, no matter how much sexy software they have, start manually first and get a habit of this measuring and get a tempo for this measuring. And then before you know it, that tempo, that cadence will start to take you into a natural place that software is going to make a lot of sense. And so that's a lot of times software, or the limitations of software, because sometimes the software they have won't accomplish its goal, will not allow them to move forward, and they get stuck. And then they never actually start and continue measuring what we want them to measure, so they don't know the truth about what's actually happening. So that's my advice. Just start. Piece of paper and a pencil, start writing down the data or putting it into a Google Sheet and start measuring it on a daily and a weekly basis. And that will lead its way naturally to the right software to use to manage it.
Absolutely. Don't over-engineer it, right? I could see that being a massive hurdle. Absolutely. Start simply. Do you guys have any tips for qualifying leads? Maybe do some pre-screening maybe even before those calls come in. Maybe create a little exclusivity. Let your prospects know the types of cases that you can handle, that you want to handle, the types of clients that you can help.
Yeah, Michael, we started using forms on our end, and we teach clients to do the same thing. It really is practice area to practice area. So like just as an instance, a PI firm or Social Security disability firm, PI specifically, will have a lot greater variance of quality of leads than, say, a bankruptcy firm, right? For lots of reasons. The bankruptcy is a pretty clear, cut and dry situation of what people are in, whether they can be or can't be helped. PI is a much wider funnel for lots and lots of reasons. And so depending on the width and breadth of your funnel and how many different types of leads you bring in, you should determine more of these type of question answer funnels. Like Michael, I think we use Typeforms right now. Is that right?
Yeah, we use Typeform, and that helps us start to determine the quality of the prospect we have coming through. But I'm going to go down a different track. And so I'm personally not as much. There's some clear-cut qualifiers for us, like depending on your practice area, that would determine, okay, this is a case we can take or this is a case we can't take. Generally speaking, especially if you're going to plug any type of appointment setters or salespeople into the role, I come more from the camp that I would rather not do much qualifying, and I would rather get the appointment set and have the salesperson close the deal, which leads me to a larger conversation for the attorneys listening, that if you do take the leap and you do decide to plug people into those roles and put specialists into those roles, you have to understand that they're going to or should be doing their job. And doing their job means that they're going to get the appointment set and then they are going to close the deal. And that means there's going to be some people that come through that maybe ordinarily you as the attorney would not have wanted to come through in the first place because you would have pre-screened them at the front side.
Right.
But understand that's a byproduct, and that's actually something to be celebrated, not put down, because that means they're doing their job. And when they get to the onboarding session or whatever that next step looks like for you after sales, that's where you can have that conversation if it's not a good fit for you as an attorney for a client perspective.
Yeah, great point. To Michael's point, we'd rather let them close everybody and filter it out. What do they say? Fix it in post, right? So we don't have to go through with the case if we find out it's not a case for us, but let's at least get the deal closed. And if we have to unwind from it, we can unwind from it. And I lost like 20% of the room when I just said that, because they immediately went, oh, well, I won't be able to get out of that case for different reasons. And they gave me 100 reasons why that wasn't going to work, right? And so that's the challenge when working with attorneys. I get it, where their brain automatically goes, and I love you for it. Meaning I love you attorneys that are watching. I love you for it. I've been working with you for a very long time, and I get it. There are outlier situations where we got to deal with bell curves, right? And so we're trying to get consistencies in bell curves. There are always outliers, but
Always.
So Car, to your point, in the marketing side of things, you can add questionnaires or you can add follow-ups that get more specific with either clarifying what type of case they have and using qualifying questions that take them down a tree that determine whether they're qualified or no, they're qualified before they even schedule an appointment, or whether before they even become a quote unquote new lead in your system. You can certainly do that on the phone. We have firms that use their ASAs, appointment setting agents, to actually do a little bit of qualifying to make sure they're only setting people in the right jurisdictions or the right practice area, or that there's no conflict checks or whatever. And so certainly some of that happens. But all of that being said, Michael's 100% right. Let a salesperson be what a salesperson is. And that's to maximize close the deals and figure out a way to celebrate that. And let's just figure out how to get out of those deals as quickly as possible if they're not right for us.
Yeah. And Michael, to your point, I think if we are removing those screens, it's critical that you have the system and the help, the support in place to do that, right? You can't just, kind of open the floodgates and then the attorney is inundated and trying to screen these, right? I mean, I think that's a critical point to make is, we have to work, incrementally to make these changes, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, because otherwise that just puts them in the same position, right? Because now they're going to do the screening.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
Well, I mean, it's a real problem in law, right? That sometimes we get a hold of folks and they had a 30% close rate and they go to a 60% close rate. And that sounds like a hallelujah moment, but that means they doubled the number of clients that were coming through the door. And they may or may not have had the infrastructure to be able to handle that, right? And so sometimes the firm is mature enough and they already know how many cases they can handle based on the processes they have. Most times they're not. They don't really know what their capacity limitations are. And so typically what has to happen is they have to go until they find themselves in chaos and then throttle back a little bit while they build the system. So it's oftentimes, you go along, you grow, and then you go along, and then you grow, and then you go along. Like that's the way to do it. There's no such thing as this successfully in most firms. Some firms can do it, but boy, they are advanced. They've been doing it a minute, and they have dialed in what their capacity matrices are and what their team can and can't handle. And they have a clear path to be able onboarding and training new staff quickly to be able to handle that increased capacity. And that's another problem that we could get into a rabbit hole about for years or for a good long time in the conversation. But for today, no, your point is correct. Knowing what your limitations are is very important, because Michael always says it, and I said it, and we both learned it from my uncle, who said, if you are not very good at providing the service because you've oversold your capacity and you keep the gas on the marketing and the sales, all you're going to do is speed up the pace at which everybody finds out you're not very good at what you do, right?
Wise
and
word.
so you got to be careful with that. Right. But typically I find that a law firm likes to get their capacity right first before they fix the marketing and the intake and the closing. And that in our positioning on that is, no, let's sell first and serve second, and then throttle where we need to, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we talk about sales, I know some attorneys don't necessarily like talking about sales. They maybe don't like that word. They don't consider themselves salespeople. But the fact is that initial consultation is pretty critical, right? Talk to me about that.
Yeah. And so for the attorneys that do not like sales, I'll use a Zig Ziglar quote, which is, sales is not something we do to our prospects, but something we do for our prospects. And boiling that down, basically speaking, we're not doing sales to the people walking in the door. It's not something we're trying to push on them, shove down their throats, do to them. We're trying to serve them and help them out of the problem that they're experiencing. So I go as far as saying that I would say we have an ethical responsibility as a firm to close as many clients as we can as possible. If you believe that you are the best firm in your geographical location, in your practice area, if you believe those things are true, then we should want to make sure that everybody that passes through that door hires our firm, because we're going to be the best to serve them and help them through that situation.
Do you have any consultation tips, or even what's the proper way to end a consultation? How do we kind of set them up for next steps? Do you have any of those tips?
Yes. So one, I would tell you, making sure that during the initial consultation, we're asking for the order, right? So we're actually trying to close the deal, not just saying, hey, take some time to think about it and come back to us, because that's just going to result in a lot of people that never come back to you. And then the second thing, go ahead.
Sorry to plus one on that. This is a one call close environment, right?
Yes.
This is a one call close environment. Any lawyer who tells me, oh, we're going to have multiple steps, the only time I've seen that be a rare exception is in business to business transactional, or some high level intellectual property where we have to actually craft some sort of a plan to present. But that's still a one close environment for a whole nother reason. Yes. And so this is a one call close environment that you have to maximize that conversion. Leading to your second point, Michael?
Yes. So to be clear, and to plus one on that, we view the initial consultation as the place to get the prospect to retain the firm, right? Not just an initial information giving session and bogging people down.
I feel like that's so important. Like that, yes. I think that is probably one of the most misguided, or just, it's very rare that is the approach, right? I will say that, it really is. Yeah. So I think that's a really important point. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's the place to do it. Right. And for the attorneys that are still in the consult room, and I know we've talked a lot about this legal advice, but just moving the line in which we give the legal advice, right? To Rich's point earlier, the goal of the initial consultation is to get the prospect to retain the firm so that we can solve their problem and provide them legal advice. So we have to get the prospect to retain the firm first, because if that never happens, there's nothing to do, right? There is no client. So we have to get them to retain the firm. Once that happens, I always say there's a delicate balance between sales and operations, right? Because now we have to create a successful handover to operations. So we like the onboarding call method, right? So while sales, after they've closed the deal, has the prospect in the initial consultation, taking a few minutes to explain what the next steps look like, and ideally scheduling an onboarding session with the team, whether that's the attorney or a paralegal or an onboarding specialist within the firm, scheduling that onboarding session to ensure a smooth handoff. So there's not this weird gap period where sales close the deal, but all of a sudden now operations has to get back out to them. And now the prospect feels like they're just off in nowhere land.
Yeah.
Can I add one more thing about this?
Yes, please. Yes.
This is going to be the old guy in the room being a bit of a curmudgeon, but I'm going to do it anyway. Get over it. Like, if you're an attorney listening to this and you're all freaked out about the idea of sales and what we just said about a one call close, here's what's coming. Non-attorney ownership is alive and well in many states, at least being talked about. In a couple of states, it's actually there. It's coming. And the rest of the world, and I mean the rest of the world, even like dentists and chiropractors and everybody else professional, already knows this stuff, and they're doing it. And when non-attorney ownership comes to law, you're going to be competing with the guys and the gals who are doing this. and they will win if they're doing it and you're not.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
When we look, this goes all the way back to 2009-ish when I built my first firm. It was a bankruptcy firm. And yes, 2009 was a pretty darn good year for bankruptcy. But that being said, my competition were closing in the 30% mark. And I know because I had their data. And they were selling at 1/3 of the price we were selling at. So we're selling 260% greater than they were price-wise. And we were closing at near 80%. And the reason is that we viewed the initial consultation as the responsibility to close the deal so that we can help that client. It was one of the primary reasons why we were able to grow from 0 to 120, 125 people hiring the firm in a matter of 2.5 years, 125 people a month hiring the firm in a matter of 2.5 years. And the reason is because we were so focused and knew that this was the difference maker while everybody else was sitting around giving first proposals and second proposals. And we'll come back when you think you have an idea of what you want to do. And we'll come back when you have all the money or whatever they say to them. Or go home and think about it and let me know because you're being a nice guy. I'm telling you, the game changer is knowing how to close the deal during the initial consultation. And because we started this about intake, knowing how to close a deal during the intake. Both of those things simultaneously will break you apart from your competition because what they're not doing is they're not doing that. And if you do that, you will set yourself apart.
I love it. I love it. And if you don't close on that call, that prospective client will move on, right? There are a lot of other options, and the attorney down the street may be able to, may actually take the step to close on that initial consultation. So important reminders. One thing I want to get to before we wrap up, what are some ways that an attorney can kind of know when it's the right time to hire, whether it's their very first employee or their 15th employee? What are some ways, how can an attorney be confident that it's time to get some help?
So it's the numbers, right? So how many leads? So we teach the perfect client lifecycle. So how many qualified leads you have coming in the course of a month? How many of those are turning into an appointment, assuming you set appointments? How many of those show? How many of those retain the firm? What's the average client value? So when it comes on the sales and conversion side, from a hiring perspective, it's really a mathematical. When you have more than, in our world, if you've got more than 20 to 30 leads in a month, you probably need a dedicated phone person help you maximizing your lead flow because you're probably leaving something on the floor. And then from there, it's just about how many leads you have and how many required calls. And then after that, it's about capacity issues on the other side. And when you as an attorney are doing all of the operations of the business, providing you're doing all the legal work, you're doing all the paralegal work, you're doing everything. It's time for you to be able to replace yourself. The way that you're going to help the most amount of people in your law firm is if you start to replace yourself in every role. So when you first start in a law firm, here's how it goes. You place an ad or you do some referral work and the phone calls go probably to your cell phone and maybe roll over to an answering service if you're smart. And then you answer all the calls and then you get busy and you go do the work and then you have to answer your calls and your leads back at night and you've missed a few of them, but you get what you can. And then you go through this feast and famine stage. And then at some point you have to go get all the work done. And then, so you have to kind of usually throttle down the marketing to get the work done. So you have this up and down cycle. Well, eventually you get smart enough to hire somebody to help you with the phone. So they help you with the phones. And now you set more of your leads into appointments. And now you're busy meeting with people. And you're so busy meeting with people, you can't actually get the work done because you're okay. And so now you have to think to yourself, okay, what do I get? What's my next hire? Should it be somebody to meet with the people or should it be somebody to get the work done? Michael and I believe that you should hire somebody to meet the prospects and you still get the work done. And then once you've no longer answering the phones, once you're no longer meeting with the consults, then you can clearly be able to see your way through to when is it time for me to hire another bar card for my firm to be able to replace them. And then from there's a whole bunch of workflow studies you have to do to understand the right processes depending on the practice area. Michael, is there anything you want to add to that or did I miss something?
I think it was well said.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, that was great. That was great. So before we do wrap up, Rich, Michael, please let everyone know a little bit more about what it's like working with you and your team and how they can get in touch to learn more.
Yeah, absolutely. So working with us, we focus on a lot of specific challenges in a law firm. We talked about some of them here in this conversation, right? Intake, closing. And so we've built systems around each of those processes, right? Around each of those functions of a firm. And we've got solutions across the board for each of them, whether it's training, whether it's actual staffing for an appointment setter, right? So we've got solutions when it comes to each of those functions of a firm. And so if a firm would like to learn a little bit more about working with us, they could head over to yourpracticemaster.com, learn a little bit more. And we'd love to take some time, chat with you, learn a little bit more about your firm, see if you have any opportunities. And if you do, we could certainly explore what that would look like working together. Rich, anything you want to plus one on there?
Yeah, look, we've written 4 books on the subject. And so you're welcome to grab one of our books for free. We've got audio versions of them. You can grab one of those for free. You can listen to our podcast. At the end of the day, you know, if anybody desires, if they're ready. So here's what we don't do, Carl. Like, we're not an easy button, right? So you don't go hire us and we're going to make your phone ring or we're going to do all this for you. That's not what we are. We're a firm that helps you identify who you are as an attorney ownership, where you are in that cycle, like what level attorney owner are you? And then we help you identify what pipelines are broken. And then once you identify what pipelines are broken, we help you identify what systems you have to fix, and we hold your hand whilst you go through the process of fixing it, right? So we're very much a consulting-based firm. We have some services that will actually be done for you, and we can help you with them. But for the most part, what we're doing is we're helping you become a better small business owner. And basically what happens is law firm owners tell us, listen, they've spent a lot of money, resources, and time becoming a great lawyer, but they haven't invested very many money, resources, or time in becoming a great business owner. And so we just help them close that gap. That's really what we do, if that makes sense. So there's not a lot of selling involved in our world. You're either ready or you're not. If they're ready and they want to have that conversation, great. If they just want some free resources, we're happy to give it to them.
Excellent. I'll definitely include all the links that you mentioned in these materials. If you want to make real change in your practice and you're serious about growth, please reach out to Michael and to Rich. They're really great. We've been partnering for, I think, more than a decade now. So I know they're the real deal, and I really appreciate your time. You were both super generous with your time and your information. It was a lot of fun. Thank you, guys.
Hey, Cara, we love our partnership with you. We love watching our clients get great results with the work that you do with them and the things that you're doing to help them monetize social media and use video and everything that you've done, and watch your growth and how your company has more. And so it's always an honor to walk alongside you, and thank you for having us as a guest today.
Hey, I certainly appreciate that. Some really great stuff from Michael and Rich today, right? Here are the primary takeaways I see. Number 1, intake calls should be handled by a specialist. Intake is sales work, so your calls should be handled by a salesperson, not an attorney. Attorneys rarely close at the same rate that a good salesperson does. Usually that's because they start providing advice instead of focusing on making the sale. Number 2, the calls should follow a set pattern. This is important. The format should be outlined with much listening, empathy, and reinforcement of the prospect's problem and your solution, sort of interspersed with questions that gather the needed information, of course. Monitor usage by recording calls and then celebrating adoption. Number 3, call results must be measured. At a minimum, the number of calls, appointments, and signups need to be tracked daily, weekly, and monthly. Lead source and prospect quality should also be tracked. Don't let software delay you. A simple spreadsheet can get you started. Number 4, qualifying should not be overly restrictive. Don't ask too many questions on your inquiry forms or be too rigid about case acceptance in the beginning, especially when a practice is young or maybe your marketing is just ramping up. You can incrementally tighten your screening later. And lastly, number 5, you should always seek to close in one call. Depending on your specialty, closing can mean setting an appointment with an attorney. Maybe closing can mean sending a retainer agreement, getting it signed within 3 days, but giving the prospect time to think over their decision is not a win. Okay, I hope you found today's interview with Michael and Richard to be helpful. Be sure to join us for the next episode of the Grow with Cara show, happening very soon. Keep marketing. Take care. Bye-bye.